See, you don't quit it, and you don't quit in sports. You retire. You don't get to quit. It's not an option. See, someone told me that a long time ago. That ain't even an option. And the person told me that, he ain't here anymore. He died. This is what's great about sports. This is what the greatest thing about sports is. You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Randall Handles Football Podcast. I'm your host, Randall Tevas. So this week officially begins the second half of the NFL season, as we are officially finished with the first 8 weeks of the season. And it's about this time that I would like to give out my mid-season projections as far as MVP, Offensive Player, and Defensive Player of the Years, as well as the Coach of the Year. But before we get to that fun, exciting stuff, let's preview my picks from last week. Last week was one of my worst weeks that I've had in all season. Overall, I correctly picked 5 games and incorrectly picked 9 games. That's pretty bad. That's about a 33% correctly chosen, which isn't where I would like to be. Ideally, obviously, I'd like to be above 500, but that low is really bad. So, just to go over those games from last week, the Carolina Panthers lost to the Atlanta Falcons on Thursday Night Football. You know, the Falcons are a weird team. I feel like the moment that everybody gives up on them is when they start to win, and the moment that people start to believe in the Falcons is when they begin losing. So, that's a bit of what happened last week, and I know I'm going to regret it for my pick this coming week, but, you know, the Falcons took care of business on Thursday Night Football. The Miami Dolphins took care of business against Los Angeles Rams, as I correctly guessed. Tua Tagovailoa got his first career win in his first career NFL start, so I'm very happy for him. In a game in which the Rams absolutely dominated on the offensive side. You know, I think they outgained the Dolphins 470 yards to like 150. So, you know, the Rams did everything right to win the game. Unfortunately, I think they had 4 first half turnovers, and that's ultimately what lost them the game. But hey, a win's a win if you're the Dolphins, and so the Miami Dolphins took care of business against the Rams. The Chiefs blew out the Jets, which was my lock of the week. You know, no surprise there. I think in one of the bigger surprises, the Green Bay Packers lost to the Minnesota Vikings. Dalvin Cook absolutely thrashed the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers got their second loss of the season. The Colts beat the Lions, as I said. The Las Vegas Raiders came into Cleveland and beat the Cleveland Browns. So sad. Like I said, I thought the Browns were going to rally around the injury to Odell Beckham Jr. and get a win for him. That was not the case. It was terrible conditions, very windy day. The Browns had their chances to win the game, but ultimately lost. I think it was like 16-6, the final score, so a low-scoring game. The Tennessee Titans lost to the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow got his second career win of his career, so happy for him. Happy to see the Tennessee Titans lose, although I did pick the Titans to win the game, They did lose that game. My upset of the week was the New England Patriots beating the Buffalo Bills, and that almost happened. The Patriots had the ball inside the red zone with, 20, 30 seconds left to play, and unfortunately Cam Newton did fumble the ball away, and that, lost the game for them. So they had their chance to win, but they blew it. That's the way the Patriots season's going, so I incorrectly picked the upset of the week. I had Seattle beating the San Francisco 49ers. Man, sad game for the Niners. More injuries. I had the Chicago Bears beating the New Orleans Saints. That game went into overtime, and the Saints won the game with about 1 minute left in overtime. The Bears had so many chances to win that game, and they just looked like they did not want to win the game. And ultimately, the Saints did pull out the victory, so I picked that game incorrectly. The Cowboys lost to the Eagles on Sunday Night Football. I thought Dallas was going to, for some reason, Thought they were actually going to be able to run the ball on Philadelphia. I thought, their quarterback DiNucci was going to be able to do enough to win the game. That did not happen. The Buccaneers squeaked out a win on Monday Night Football against the New York Giants. The Giants scored with about 20 seconds left in the game, and they needed a 2-point conversion to tie the game. They did not get that 2-point conversion, so ultimately, the Buccaneers came away with the victory, a 2-point victory against the lowly New York Giants. As far as the added games due to the COVID, Pittsburgh and Baltimore, I thought Baltimore was going to win the game. They had their chances at the end of the game to win it, but they did come up short, and Pittsburgh remained undefeated. Still our only undefeated team in this season so far. And the Chargers absolutely blew a game. I think they were winning at one point 28-10 or 28-3 in that game. And they did lose the game 31-30. So on a last-second touchdown pass by Drew Lock. So, Chargers blew the game. Denver got that win as well. Like I said, my lock of the week was the Chiefs, and they did win. My upset of the week was the New England Patriots, and they lost, unfortunately. So, like I said, overall, I was 5-9 last week, not where I want to be. So hopefully this week I can do a little bit better. Before we get into the games for the Week 9, I want to go over some of my picks for the MVPs, offensive players, defensive players, and coach of the year. Now, I don't think there's a single person who will probably differ than what I'm about to say, but I think as of right now, the MVP of this NFL season has to be Russell Wilson. He's been the best quarterback in the NFL. He isn't leading in yardage, but sometimes yardage isn't the most important thing. He is still top 5. He has the most touchdowns, and I think he's only thrown 4 interceptions. He's on pace to at least tie Peyton Manning's NFL record for most touchdown passes in a single season. That's only if he continues this torrid pace. He's up to 26 right now through 8 games. That puts him right around that 52-55 mark range that Manning was at. So, not much to say, but Wilson has to be the MVP this year. I think some consideration has to be given to Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs and Tom Brady of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So if the season ended today, I would have them finishing 1, 2, and 3. Mahomes has still been on fire this season. Even his 2 or 3 game stretch where he wasn't quite himself, and the Chiefs offense, where he's only putting up like maybe 200 yards passing, still has him in the top 5 in yardage and in touchdowns. He has an incredible 20 touchdown to 1 interception ratio. So Mahomes has to be up there for an MVP consideration. And Tom Brady, really a bounce back season from him. Everybody thought he was too old or he was done. And again, guess what? He's tied with Mahomes in touchdowns with 20 touchdowns. He does have 5 interceptions, but I expect that number to decrease. He's not going to continue throwing those interceptions. The Buccaneers team is way too talented. Of course, all these weapons around Tom Brady. He has the most weapons this season since he's had in his 2007, 2008 seasons with the Patriots when they had Randy Moss, Wes Welker, all those weapons when he put up his 50 touchdown season and went to the Super Bowl. So, it shouldn't be any surprise that Brady is doing all of this. Now, typically MVP is reserved for a quarterback. And so, clearly it goes without saying that Russell Wilson probably should be considered the offensive player of the year as well. But I'm going to go in a separate direction and consider some other players for the offensive player of the year. Excluding Wilson, my offensive player of the year would have to be Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. Dalvin Cook right now is 2nd in the league in rushing yards and 1st in the league in rushing touchdowns. And it's what he does in the passing game, in the screen game as well, that really puts him above, Derrick Henry, the leading rusher, and specifically Alvin Kamara, who I have as the number 2 offensive player of the year. I really like what Dalvin Cook has been doing all season long, not just in that game against Green Bay, but he has been the one stabilizing force for the Minnesota Vikings. Even when Kirk Cousins can't stop turning the ball over, he always has Dalvin Cook right next to him or right behind him. So, I really like what he's been doing all season long. He has 10 touchdowns rushing, so, it can't go wrong with that. But like I said, my number 2 player probably isn't too far behind Dalvin Cook, and that's Alvin Kamara. Unfortunately, the Saints don't run the ball enough with Kamara for me to put him as number 1, but he does have the most scrimmage yards in the NFL this season, and it's really what he does in the passing game, where he really is like another wide receiver that really, thrusts up and increases his value. He's a great weapon. He's been their leading receiver all season long, especially with Michael Thomas out since week 1. Thomas is coming back pretty soon, so it'll be interesting to see if he continues on his pace. I don't see Dalvin Cook's workload changing at all. Not like they're waiting for someone to come back from injury. So I think even as the season progresses, he'll still be at the very top. And I think ultimately Dalvin Cook will be the Offensive Player of the Year. And as of right now, if the season ended, I still do have him as the Offensive Player of the Year. If I had to choose a third one, I'm going to give it to Russell Wilson. So I'm going to put Wilson in that conversation as well for Offensive Player of the Year. I think Wilson will be the Offensive Player of the Year if he does get, throws for that 50 or more touchdowns. You can't not give him Offensive Player of the Year. But, as of right now, I'm still going to stick with Dalvin Cook as the leading Offensive Player of the Year. As I looked at Defensive Player of the Years, typically we like the people who can sack the quarterback and pass rush, and people who are ball hawks, safeties, and cornerbacks who tend to lead the league in interceptions. As I looked at the interception leaders, there was no one who really stood out from the pack. There was a lot of people jumbled there at the top, so I wasn't going to pick any of those safeties or cornerbacks for Defensive Player of the Years, like Stephon Gilmore, who won it last year. So really, I looked at 2 key categories in looking at the Defensive Player of the Years, and that was sacks and fumbles. And the 2 sack masters for this year, in terms of forcing fumbles, are Yannick Ngakoue of the now Baltimore Ravens. I believe it is Baltimore Ravens. He was on the Minnesota Vikings, and he was one of the leading sack leaders, probably the one defensive threat on that team, but they did trade him away after their disastrous season. And then, of course, Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns as well. Ngakoue leads the league in sacks with 10 sacks, and he has 4 forced fumbles. And it's for that reason that I am going to give him, right now, if the season ended today, the Defensive Player of the Year. Myles Garrett, though, isn't too far behind him, as he's only 1 sack behind Ngakoue with 9. He has 4 forced fumbles, and he also has 2 fumble recoveries. I think all of that will probably make them a 1-2 punch. Like, you probably couldn't go either way in choosing them. They've been dominant all season long. And then my third player for Defensive Player of the Year, if it came down to this, is the best defensive player on the last undefeated team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's their leading pass rusher, T.J. Watt. I think it's kind of interesting. J.J. Watt, of course, of the Houston Texans, has a couple of Defensive Player of the Years under his belt. It'll be really cool to see, the brothers T.J. Watt now get a Defensive Player of the Year award as well. And, he is deserving. He has been one of the best pass rushers these past couple of seasons as well. So, again, if the season ended, I got Yannick Ngakoue getting the award, with Myles Garrett finishing second and T.J. Watt finishing third. Kind of interesting now that I think about it, all 3 of those pass rushers are all from the same division, all from the AFC North, which is kind of funny. It must be terrible to be a quarterback in that division right about now. So there's that. Now, for my Coach of the Year, it probably goes without saying, but I have to give it to the team that's still undefeated, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers, their head coach, Mike Tomlin. If the season ended today, of course, they would remain undefeated, and you have to give the Coach of the Year award to the coach who coaches his team to being undefeated. You got to remember, the Pittsburgh Steelers were not a playoff team last year. So if they make this huge turnaround and they finish as the best or one of the best teams in the entire NFL, going from not being a playoff team to now being the best team in the NFL has to garner you some Coach of the Year awards. And so I have Mike Tomlin as the pick as Coach of the Year. And right behind Mike Tomlin, I think the biggest, maybe not so much as the biggest, I thought they were 1 season away from being here, but they're kind of a surprise to me, as I thought they were going to be 1 season away, and that's the coach of the Arizona Cardinals. I think Cliff Kingsbury has done a terrific job. Obviously they made that blockbuster trade over the offseason when they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that set this team over the top. That was a terrific move. And ultimately, I think it's paying dividends thus far. And so I have Cliff Kingsbury as the number 2, right behind Mike Tomlin for Coach of the Year. And then my third choice for Coach of the Year is probably the second best team in the entire NFL right now, and that's Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, everybody gives the Seahawks flack and gets on them for their defense not stepping up. And of course, they did step up against the 49ers, but listen, when you have an offense who's just putting up numbers, and it was the same kind of argument that was being made about the Kansas City Chiefs, a couple of seasons ago, when, next thing you know, after the first quarter, after the first half, teams are already down 28-7 or what have you. Of course, they're going to start moving the ball on offense. They're going to start throwing and picking up their yardage in the second half. And I think a little bit of that is what's happening with the Seattle Seahawks and why their defensive numbers, as far as yards allowed and points allowed, is so inflated. And like I said, it was the same thing that happened to the Chiefs a couple of seasons ago when that offense, when the Kansas City Chiefs offense and Pat Mahomes, were putting up all these record numbers. So I'm not concerned about the Seahawks defense, and I think Pete Carroll has done an excellent job, and so I have him as the number 3 right now in the running for Coach of the Year. So again, just to review, my MVP of this season is Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks. My Offensive Player of the Year is going to be Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. My Defensive Player of the Year is Yannick Ngakoue of the Baltimore Ravens. And my Coach of the Year has to go to Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now that all of that has been established, let's go ahead and look at the upcoming games for this week 9 of the NFL season. Starting off with our Thursday night football game this week. That sees the Green Bay Packers coming into San Francisco to take on the 49ers. Green Bay is going to be without Aaron Jones, without Jamal Williams, any of their rushing leaders, although it shouldn't matter too much as they have Aaron Rodgers and they still have Devontae Adams to lead their offense. Now listen, just like we saw last week with the Minnesota Vikings, if the 49ers can run the ball effectively and really control the time of possession and really control the ball and not let, Rodgers and the Packers offense see the field very much, this game might surprise a lot of people and the 49ers might find a way to squeak out a win. And so with that being said, I know the Packers are probably heavy favorites, even though this game is in San Francisco. And the interesting thing about San Francisco is they have a record of 4-4, and everybody is saying about how terrible of a team they are. And I know they've had tons and tons and tons of injuries, and now they have 4 players going onto the COVID list, starting with Kendrick Bourne and Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams. They're out a lot of weapons, but like I said, if the 49ers can run the ball and they can run it effectively, I have the 49ers winning this game as my upset of the week. Okay. So again, Thursday Night Football, I have the 49ers coming away with the victory as my upset of the week. Going into Sunday morning, our first game of the season, first game of Sunday morning, is a battle of NFC East teams, and that's the New York Giants traveling to Washington to take on the Washington football team. The Giants nearly squeaked out a win last week against the Buccaneers, and I think they're going to carry on some of that momentum, and I have the Giants beating Washington here. I know Washington has been playing pretty well, especially with Kyle Allen at quarterback, since they made that move from Dwayne Haskins. But I just like what the Giants have been doing recently, and I have the Giants coming away with the victory here against Washington. It'll be interesting to see who gets that number 1 pick and that chance to draft Trevor Lawrence. Our next game sees the Chicago Bears traveling to Tennessee to take on the Titans. Now, I know a lot of people were very high on the Titans, and these last couple of weeks, when they lost to Pittsburgh and last week they lost to the Cincinnati Bengals, they've probably, calmed some of their excitement about these Tennessee Titans. I have the Tennessee Titans losing 3 games in a row and losing this game as well. Obviously, Chicago's defense is one of the best, and I think they can do enough to slow down Derrick Henry and obviously to stop Ryan Tannehill. It's just the Titans' defense isn't anything to fear, and I'm expecting the Chicago Bears to be able to move the ball against this Tennessee defense, and I have the Bears winning this game pretty handily, pretty easily as well. So I have Chicago winning this game. Our next game is a battle of NFC North teams with the Detroit Lions visiting the Minnesota Vikings. As we saw last week, the Minnesota Vikings were able to run the ball very effectively and saw Dalvin Cook have a career game. I think Minnesota's going to be able to do a lot of the same things this week against this Detroit Lions team. And I have the Vikings beating the Detroit Lions here in Week 9. Our next game sees the Carolina Panthers traveling to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Not much to say here. I think the Chiefs are probably one of the top 3 teams in the entire NFL right now. Definitely one of the best in the AFC. Them, Steelers, Ravens are up there. I don't think this is going to be much of a contest again either. I have the Kansas City Chiefs blowing out the Carolina Panthers. Our next game, Sunday morning, sees the Houston Texans traveling to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. The Jaguars are going to be without Gardner Minshew at quarterback. I think that's really going to hurt them. I have the Houston Texans taking care of business in this AFC South matchup, and I have the Houston Texans winning this game against the Jaguars. Our next game sees the Baltimore Ravens traveling to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. This is a battle of 2 really good AFC teams. The Colts are right up there for their division lead with the Titans in the AFC South. Of course, the Ravens, if they would have won last week, would have been tied for the lead in the AFC North with the Steelers, but they did lose that game. I think the Ravens get back on track and they get this win here in Week 9 against the Colts. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have a few takeaways, a defensive touchdown that really seals the game for them against Phillip Rivers. So I have the Baltimore Ravens imposing their will and beating the Indianapolis Colts. Our next game here in Week 9 sees the Seattle Seahawks traveling to the East Coast to take on the Buffalo Bills. I think this may be the first game where we see where we kind of see Russell Wilson come back to earth. Buffalo Bills have a good defense. They have been getting, a little bit thrashed these past couple of weeks, but I think that, they're really looking forward to this matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. And I think they could do enough to slow down this Seahawks offense. Obviously, I think the Bills' offense themselves will be able to move the ball against the Seattle Seahawks. And so I have the Buffalo Bills winning this game against the Seahawks. It's not much of an upset, and I really wouldn't be surprised at all if Buffalo is the favored team here because they are a home team. So again, I can't call this my upset of the week, and even if so, it wouldn't be much of even if Seattle is favored, still not much of an upset considering Buffalo Bills are one of the best teams in the AFC as well. So I have the Bills winning this game in Week 9 against the Seattle Seahawks. Our next game in Week 9 sees the Denver Broncos traveling to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. As I mentioned at the beginning of this show, the Falcons are a weird team who, as soon as you think the Falcons are getting back on track, they end up disappointing teams and losing games they probably shouldn't lose. I consider this one of those games where they probably shouldn't lose, and my intuition tells me I should pick the Denver Broncos to win. However, and I'm probably going to regret this, I have the Atlanta Falcons beating the Denver Broncos. The Broncos, although they did come back and win last week against the Los Angeles Chargers, they were really getting their butts kicked most of that game, and they took a big second half comeback to actually squeak out that win. And I don't think there's much of a difference between the Chargers and the Falcons, especially now the Falcons are home. I'm picking the Atlanta Falcons to win this game. Our next matchup sees a battle of AFC West teams as we move into our Sunday afternoon games, and we have the Las Vegas Raiders traveling to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. Now, as I said, Los Angeles did blow that game last week. Las Vegas did come away with a win last week against the Browns. I'm picking the Chargers to win this game. I think Justin Herbert probably right now would be the rookie of the year, even ahead of Joe Burrow. What I've seen Justin Herbert do all season long, no matter what team they're playing, they're always in that game, and he's always able to put up numbers. I think this game's going to be no different. I think he's going to lead his team to a victory here in this Week 9 matchup against the Raiders. I have the Chargers beating the Raiders here in Week 9. Our next matchup sees me with my lock of the week as the Pittsburgh Steelers take on the Dallas Cowboys. Not much to say here. Dallas is now going to be onto their 4th quarterback as they start either Cooper Rush or Garrett Gilbert. Pittsburgh still undefeated. There's no reason to pick Dallas here. I will be very shocked if Dallas actually wins this game. They haven't been able to run the ball with Zeke Elliott all season long, which has been a huge disappointment after getting paid all this money. I have Pittsburgh winning this game pretty pretty handily. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 30, 40-point win for a Pittsburgh Steelers. So I have the Steelers winning. Our next matchup sees the Miami Dolphins coming to the West Coast and taking on the Arizona Cardinals. I know to a time last week they got their victory against the Los Angeles Rams, but their offense really was not able to do anything last week when they only put up like 150 total yards. Tagovailoa only had like 80 or 90 passing yards all game long. That's not going to cut it to win this game. I think Kyler Murray is able to do enough to win this game. I have the Cardinals beating the Dolphins here in this matchup. This moves us into our Sunday night game, which probably will end up being the game of the week, as the New Orleans Saints come into Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers. We have a battle of the ageless wonder quarterbacks in Tom Brady and Drew Brees. I have Tom Brady coming away with the victory here. I have the Buccaneers beating the New Orleans Saints. I think the Buccaneers are the more complete team, offense, defense, and special teams wise. The Saints, their offense hasn't quite been the same since from last year when Michael Thomas set the NFL record in most receptions. Obviously, he's been out since week 1. Antonio Brown, Mr. Big Chest himself, finally makes his season debut with the Buccaneers. I think that'll be exciting. It'll just add some more drama in this game. So it'll be fun. I can't wait to watch this Sunday night matchup. I have the Buccaneers beating the New Orleans Saints. This brings us to our Monday Night Football game, which will probably be a big yawner, a big snooze fest. It would not surprise me in the least bit if the New York Jets get their first win of the season here. And boy, oh boy, will people be clamoring in New England. We have the New England Patriots traveling to the Meadowlands to take on the Jets. The Jets have been an absolute dumpster fire, much like the year 2020 itself. But listen, the Patriots haven't been much better themselves. Going way back to, I believe it was in week 3, or maybe week 2, when the Patriots were about ready to knock off the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday Night Football, and they were 1 yard short. They went with a quarterback power with Cam Newton, and he got stuffed at the 1 yard line as time expired. They have not been the same team since. And like I said, it would not surprise me in the least bit if the Jets get their first win of the season here. However, I'm not going to pick the Jets to win. I'm still going to pick the Patriots to win, and I have the Patriots beating the Jets here on Monday Night Football in this Week 9 matchup. So, just to recap our games for this week, I have the 49ers as my upset of the week beating the Green Bay Packers, the Giants beating the Washington, the Bears beating the Titans, the Vikings beating the Lions, Kansas City Chiefs beating the Carolina Panthers at home, Texans going into Jacksonville and beating the Jaguars, the Ravens over the Colts, the Bills not upsetting, but quote-unquote upsetting the Seattle Seahawks, the Falcons beating the Broncos, Chargers over the Raiders, Steelers over the Cowboys, Cardinals beating the Miami Dolphins. On Sunday Night Football, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beating the New Orleans Saints, and lastly, the Patriots beating the Jets. So, I know there's been a lot of information in here. Like I said, I got my picks for this coming week, Week 9. I reviewed the games from last week, and I gave you guys my midseason awards for MVP, Offensive, Defensive, and Coach of the Year. So, this has been another episode of the Randall Handles Football Podcast. Thank you everybody for listening, and I'll see you all next week. Enjoy this week's games in the NFL season.
I don't care who you play, whether it's a high school team, a junior college team, a college team, much less an NFL team. When you turn the ball over 5 times, 4 interceptions, 1 for a touchdown, 3 others in field position to set up touchdowns, you ain't gonna beat anybody I just talked about. Anybody. All right? And that was a disgraceful performance, in my opinion. We threw that game. We gave it away by doing that. We gave them the friggin' game. In my opinion, that sucked. What's that? Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs? I just hope we can win a game.